The hum of the car engine purred softly as Jonathan Roumie steered his weathered SUV into the parking lot of Luxury Motors, a prestigious dealership nestled in the heart of Sunville. The late afternoon sun slanted through the gleaming vehicles, highlighting their mirror-smooth finishes in sharp, elegant lines. The air carried a crisp blend of new rubber and polished metal, but in that moment everything seemed to hush, as if an odd breeze had slipped through unnoticed. Jonathan stepped out, his old shoes scuffing lightly on the paved stone, his gaze sweeping over the rows of cars filled with hope. He had come with a special purpose to find a car to gift his mother for her 70th birthday, a token of gratitude for the years she'd devoted to raising him. He wore a long black coat, a black baseball cap shading half his face, creating a discreet yet striking look, accentuated by a simple wooden cross necklace hanging loosely around his neck. The small hand-carved cross was a symbol of faith he carried everywhere, from the sets of The Chosen to his private moments. Today it swayed gently with each step, a quiet reminder of peace amid the bustling world. Unaware of the curious glances from a few employees outside, he smiled and strode into the dealership, intent on exploring a luxurious sedan he'd had his eye on. Inside, the cool rush of air conditioning enveloped him, mingling with the scent of fresh leather and wax. The showroom dazzled with pristine vehicles under brilliant lights, each one a work of art. The lively chatter of staff near the reception desk fell silent as Jonathan entered. He felt eyes glide over him from his black coat and cap to his worn shoes lingering on the wooden cross. A few glances flickered by, not hostile, but probing, thickening the room's atmosphere. Maintaining his calm demeanor, he approached a sleek silver car with a bold design, his fingers brushing the door handle as if to gauge its quality. Just then a figure emerged from the far side of the showroom. It was Elena, the dealership manager, a middle-aged woman with golden hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her sharp features and piercing gaze, paired with a tailored black suit, glittering high heels and a clipboard tucked under her arm, exuded unmistakable authority. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the polished floor as she approached, a faint smile on her lips that failed to mask her wariness. Reaching Jonathan, she pointed directly at the cross and spoke in a cold, clipped tone. "Excuse me, can I help you with something?" Jonathan looked up, his cap tilting slightly, and offered a gentle smile. "Hello, I just want to look at a few cars," he replied warmly, gesturing toward the silver sedan. Elena narrowed her eyes, scanning him from head to toe, her smile fading into a barely concealed frown. Her gaze lingered on the cross before she pointed again, asking, "Are you here to buy a car?" Her voice carried a hint of skepticism, as if doubting his intent. Jonathan nodded, keeping his friendly tone. "Yes, I'm looking for one to gift my mother for her birthday." Elena paused, her lips tightening, as if weighing his words for truth. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here," she said, her voice strained, her finger still aimed at the cross. "Most of our cars require pre-qualification. Perhaps I should suggest—" Before she could finish, a staff member called from the reception desk, "Elena, the delivery guy is here." She glanced aside, then turned back, her eyes fixed on Jonathan as if wary of his next move. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his voice still soft. "Are you assuming I can't afford it?" The question caught Elena off guard, but she quickly recovered, straightening her posture. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she replied. Her smile forced her finger, jabbing toward the cross. "Our cars start at 6 figures. I could direct you to a used car dealership nearby if needed." Her words struck like an arrow, blunt and laden with prejudice, casting a tense shadow between them. Jonathan stood still, his eyes observing silently, betraying no emotion. He touched the cross briefly, seeking comfort, then looked back at Elena. "This car looks nice," he said, pointing to the silver sedan, attempting to keep the conversation light. Elena frowned, her smile now a fragile mask. "It is," she replied, "but if you're serious, make an appointment. For now, I must ask you not to touch the vehicles, and if you don't remove that necklace, I'm afraid we can't assist you further." Jonathan froze, his hand still on the cross. He looked up, his eyes mixing surprise and doubt. "Remove the necklace?" he asked, his voice deepening. "Why would I need to do that?" Elena straightened, her tone growing firm as she pointed at the cross again. "Our policy is to maintain a neutral environment, especially here. Some customers might find religious symbols offensive. If you want to proceed, tuck it away. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." Silence descended heavy as a dark cloud. Nearby staff began to notice some whispering, their curious gazes fixed on Jonathan and Elena. He felt the pressure building, yet his stare remained steady, unshaken. "I've worn this on many occasions," he said evenly, "and never been asked to remove it. Can you show me that policy?" Elena hesitated, clearly unprepared for his response. She gripped her clipboard tightly, struggling to maintain confidence. "It's part of our general customer conduct guidelines and inclusive environment policy." She answered, her voice trembling, her finger still directed at the cross. "We have the right to intervene if there's a risk of disturbing others." Her reply lacked conviction, and Jonathan saw through it. He stood taller, his voice gentle, but carrying a challenge. "Has anyone complained about this necklace? Or are you just guessing they might be uncomfortable?" The question made Elena falter, her face flushing with embarrassment. The staff nearby watched more openly, some frowning, others shaking their heads in disagreement with her approach. The showroom grew stifling. A young employee, Chris, near the reception desk, glanced at Jonathan with a guilty expression, as if wanting to speak but holding back. Elena, losing control, raised her voice. "I'm just trying to address potential issues proactively," she said, avoiding his gaze, her finger jabbing at the cross. "Religious symbols can be sensitive in a space like this." Her justification only complicated matters further. Jonathan sighed, his hand still on the cross. "I respect your job," he said softly, "but I'm not comfortable removing it. It's not just jewelry, it's my faith." His words rang out, not harsh, but enough to unsettle Elena. She scowled, her smile stiffening. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to report this to higher management," she warned, her tone sharpening, her finger aimed at the cross again. "We can refuse service to non-compliant customers?" Jonathan paused, his eyes flickering with surprise, though he held his calm. "Are you saying I could be kicked out just for this necklace?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with disbelief. "I'm not causing trouble or breaking any rules I know of." The situation had moved beyond awkwardness into a real challenge, and Jonathan seemed to adapt in real time. Elena stood firm, trying to maintain control. "I'm only asking you to follow crew or staff guidelines," she corrected, her hand brushing her collar nervously, a clear sign of stress. Another employee, Chris, approached cautiously, his eyes worried. "Elena, should I call someone?" he asked quietly, glancing at Jonathan with empathy. Before Elena could respond, a tall figure emerged from the back office. It was Vincent, the regional manager, dressed in a navy suit with a stern yet warm expression. He approached, observing the scene with curiosity, then stopped before Jonathan. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Elena turned flustered. "Vincent, I'm handling a customer who isn't following policy," she said quickly, pointing at the cross. Vincent looked at Jonathan, then the necklace, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "You're Jonathan Roumie, aren't you?" he asked, his tone blending surprise and respect. Jonathan smiled faintly, nodding. "Yes, I'm here to look at a car for my mother. But there seems to be a misunderstanding about this necklace." Vincent frowned, turning to Elena. "What policy? We have no rule against religious symbols." Elena's face reddened, stammering, "I thought it might bother other customers." Vincent sighed, facing Jonathan again. "I apologize for this. Let me take care of it." He looked at Elena, his voice stern. "Elena, we need to talk privately. As for you, Jonathan, if you'd like, I'll assist you personally." Jonathan nodded, relieved but curious about what lay ahead. The cross remained a silent witness to the unfolding tale. The cross remained a silent witness to the unfolding tale. Jonathan nodded, relieved yet curious, following Vincent out of the showroom, away from the prying eyes of the lingering staff. Vincent's shoes echoed steadily on the marble-lined hallway, leading him to a small yet elegant office at the back of the dealership. Frosted glass walls reflected a soft golden hue, and on the desk sat a nameplate reading Vincent Nguyen, Regional Manager. Vincent closed the door, turning to Jonathan with a mix of sternness and warmth. "I'm sorry about what just happened," Vincent said, his voice deep and steady, gesturing to a chair for Jonathan to sit. "I didn't expect Elena to handle it like that. She's experienced but sometimes too rigid." Jonathan settled into the seat, his black cap shifting slightly as he nodded, his fingers brushing the wooden cross. "Thanks for stepping in," he replied gently. "I just wanted to find a nice car for my mother's birthday." This cross, It's part of me not meant to cause trouble. Vincent nodded, his eyes softening with empathy. I get it, and I'm glad you weren't shaken by her attitude. This dealership was recently acquired by a new owner a few weeks ago. He hasn't made a public appearance yet, but I hear he values respect and fairness highly. He paused, studying Jonathan with interest. You play Jesus in The Chosen, don't you? I've watched a few episodes, and your portrayal is something special. Jonathan smiled, a hint of bashfulness in his eyes. Thank you. It's been a meaningful journey for me. And yes, I'm here to pick out a car for my mom. She sacrificed so much for me, so I want this gift to be special. Vincent nodded, rising to open a file on his desk. Then let me help you. We have some luxurious sedans that might suit your plan. But first, let's head to the private display area. The two left the office, moving down a corridor to a more secluded space where premium cars were neatly arranged under spotlight illumination. Jonathan approached a glossy black sedan, his fingers grazing its surface, his heart swelling with emotion as he pictured his mother's smile. But as he admired it, the sharp click of high heels interrupted. Elena appeared, her golden hair shimmering as she strode quickly, pointing directly at Jonathan. Vincent, I need to speak with you, she said, her voice tense, her glare fixed on Jonathan. This customer isn't following policy. I asked him to remove that necklace, but he refused. I've reported it to upper management. Vincent frowned, turning to Elena. What policy? I told you we have no such rule. Elena's face flushed, her fingers still aimed at the cross. But some customers might complain. I'm just protecting the dealership's reputation. Jonathan stood still, his eyes tinged with sadness, but resolute. I don't want to cause trouble, he said softly. I'm here to buy a car for my mom. This necklace doesn't hurt anyone. Elena shook her head, her voice rising. If you won't comply, I'll require you to sign a commitment to remove it, or you can't stay here. She pulled a sheet from her clipboard, thrusting it toward Jonathan, her hand trembling slightly. Vincent intervened, his tone sharp. Elena, stop. We don't force customers to do what makes them uncomfortable. But Elena didn't back down, her gaze challenging. Vincent, you don't get it. If upper management hears about this, you'll be in trouble too. Other staff began to gather, some whispering, others supporting Jonathan, like Chris, the young employee nearby, with a guilty look. Elena, is this necessary? Chris asked quietly, but she ignored him. Jonathan sighed, turning to Vincent. Maybe I should meet the new owner. If they have this policy, I'd like to hear it directly. Vincent nodded, his eyes flashing with determination. Fair enough, I'll call him. But I believe he won't agree with this approach. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and stepped aside to speak. Elena remained, her finger still on the cross, her face flushed with a mix of anger and anxiety. While waiting, Jonathan stood by the sedan, his heart a blend of hope and worry. He thought of his mother, of the smile she'd wear with the gift, but also dreaded Elena's stance. Vincent's voice carried from a distance, brief but decisive. He's on his way, Vincent said upon returning his gaze on Jonathan with curiosity. Looks like things will clear up soon. Elena froze, her hand dropping, but her eyes remained skeptical. Who could get here that fast? She muttered, her voice shaky. The staff buzzed with whispers, the dealership's air growing heavier. Jonathan stood firm, the cross a quiet emblem of his challenged faith. He didn't know who the new owner was, but he sensed this moment would shift everything. The cross stood as a quiet emblem of his challenged faith. Jonathan stood firm by the glossy black sedan, his heart a mix of hope and worry, as the atmosphere in luxury motors thickened with tension. Staff murmured their curious glances, darting between him and Elena, who stood rigid, clutching her clipboard like a final shield. Vincent approached, pocketing his phone, a trace of tension in his eyes, but his demeanor steady. He's coming, he said, his voice deep and assured, studying Jonathan with intrigue. This might all become clear soon. Elena halted, her hand falling, though her gaze stayed doubtful. Who could arrive so quickly? She murmured, her voice trembling, as if disbelieving the unfolding events. Staff gathered closer, some whispering, others stealing glances toward the main entrance. Jonathan felt the anticipation in the room, yet maintained his calm expression, his fingers brushing the cross for comfort. He thought of his mother, of the smile she'd have with the car, hoping this encounter wouldn't shatter that dream. Minutes later, the sound of the large glass doors swinging open shattered the heavy silence. A man entered, exuding authority, yet simplicity, dressed in a light gray suit and polished leather shoes. His short-cropped hair and weathered tan face spoke of experience, his sharp eyes scanning the room. A few staff recognized him exchanging hushed words, but none dared speak. He strode directly toward Jonathan, a warm smile breaking across his face. And as he neared, Jonathan noticed something unexpected. The man wore a small silver cross, glinting under the lights. "Jonathan Roumie, right?" The man said, his voice deep yet friendly, extending a hand. "I'm Michael Tran, the new owner of Luxury Motors. Great to meet you." Jonathan shook his hand, mildly surprised but returning the smile. "Thank you, Michael. I came to find a car for my mother, but there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Michael nodded, his gaze shifting to Elena, turning cold. "I heard from Vincent." "Elena, explain yourself." Elena stood frozen, her face paling, her hand trembling as she pointed at Jonathan's cross. I was just following a neutral policy," she stammered. "That necklace might disturb other customers, so I asked him to remove it. If not, I'd have him escorted out." Michael frowned, stepping closer, his tone stern. "What policy? I didn't sign any rule banning religious symbols." "Who do you think would complain?" "The people here." He gestured around the room, where staff shook their heads, some nodding in support of Jonathan. Elena lowered her head out of arguments. Michael turned to Jonathan, his voice softening. "I know you from The Chosen. Your role has inspired many, including me. This cross," he pointed to his own, "is my faith too. I bought this dealership to create a place where everyone feels respected, not judged." Jonathan smiled, touched. "Thank you, Michael. I just want my mother to be happy with this gift." Michael nodded, then addressed the entire staff, his voice commanding. "Everyone to the conference room now. We need to talk." Staff moved quickly, no one daring to resist. Elena followed silently, her face etched with worry. In the conference room, cold white light bathed the long table, the cramped space thick with tension. Jonathan sat beside Michael, his wooden cross, a bold statement against the backdrop of prejudice. Michael rose, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm Michael Tran, the new owner of Luxury Motors," he began, his voice calm yet powerful. "I came today to check the dealership, and I'm not pleased." Jonathan came with good intentions, wanting to buy a car for his mother, but was treated like an outsider over that cross. He paused, fixing on Elena. "Elena, what do you have to say?" Elena bowed her head, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry, Mr. Tran. I was wrong. I thought the necklace might bother customers, so I asked him to remove it. I didn't know he was—" Michael cut in, his voice sharp. "It doesn't matter who he is. Every customer deserves respect. Why do you think I wear this cross? For decoration?" The room fell silent, broken only by Elena's quick breaths. Jonathan spoke up, his tone warm. "I understand, Elena. Maybe you were worried about the dealership, but I believe everyone has a reason for their faith. The Chosen taught me Jesus doesn't judge, he walks with us." His words eased the tension, some staff nodding, including Chris, the young employee who'd shown concern earlier. Michael nodded, his eyes brightening. "Exactly. From now on, we're changing. No policy will ban religious symbols. We'll train everyone on inclusivity." He looked at Elena, his tone firm but not harsh. "Elena, you're directly responsible. If you want to stay, prove it with action." Elena lifted her head, eyes glistening. "I'll try, Mr. Tran, I promise." Michael nodded, then turned to Jonathan. "What car are you interested in? Let's find the best one for your mom." Jonathan smiled, relieved, though he sensed the story had more to unfold. The conference room at Luxury Motors remained hushed after Elena's commitment, the cold white light from the ceiling casting shadows over the tense faces of the staff. Michael Tran stood tall, his gaze sweeping the room, his voice deep yet commanding. "From today, we're changing how we operate," he declared, his hand resting lightly on the table. "No policy will ban religious symbols. Every customer, regardless of belief or appearance, will be respected." He turned to Elena, his look a mix of sternness and encouragement. "Elena, you'll take direct responsibility for this. I want you to organize an inclusivity training session next week. If you want to stay, prove it with action." Elena nodded, her hands clenched on her lap, her voice trembling but resolute. "I will, Mr. Tran. I don't want to repeat my mistake." Michael gave a slight nod, then glanced at Jonathan. And you let's find that car for your mother right now. Jonathan rose, filled with gratitude, following Michael to the display area. Luxurious cars stretched before him, but his mind lingered on the earlier exchange. He shared with Michael, his voice warm. The chosen taught me Jesus doesn't just judge, he walks alongside us. I hope my story today helps others see that. Michael smiled, nodding. That's what I want to build here, a place reflecting true values, not just selling cars. The air wasn't fully at ease yet. Elena stepped out of the conference room, a flicker of resistance in her eyes as she glanced at Jonathan. She whispered to Chris, the young staff member nearby, "Who does he think he is changing everything?" Chris shook his head, his voice low. "Elena, he's not forcing anyone." You saw Mr. Tran agreed. She frowned but didn't reply, turning away with a hint of irritation. The next morning, Jonathan returned to the dealership at Michael's invitation to view cars. The atmosphere had shifted. Staff greeted him with friendlier smiles, some even asking about the chosen. Michael led him to a pearl-white sedan with plush leather interiors, exactly what he had in mind for his mother. "This is the perfect choice," Michael said, opening the door. "Your mom will love it." Jonathan nodded, but his thoughts drifted to Elena. In the office, Elena sat at her computer, typing with force as if venting frustration. She still struggled to accept it, believing Jonathan was leveraging his fame to impose change. But when Chris entered with training materials, she paused. "Elena, we need to prepare for the meeting," Chris said gently. "Mr. Tran wants you to lead it." She sighed, her gaze wavering. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. Chris smiled, setting the papers down. "You could talk about yesterday, about how Mr. Roumie didn't get angry, but stayed kind. It made me rethink how I treat customers." Elena looked at Chris, then nodded slowly. Maybe he's right. I was too quick to judge." The meeting took place by week's end in a large conference room with all staff present. Michael stood beside Jonathan, introducing him as a special guest. "Jonathan isn't just a customer. He's reminded us of our core values," Michael said. Jonathan rose, his voice deep and steady. "I came here for my mother, but yesterday I learned something too. Faith isn't to divide, it's to connect. I hope my story helps you all see differently." Elena stood, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze firm. "I want to apologize to Mr. Roumie," she said, her voice shaky. "I was wrong to ask you to remove your necklace. I let prejudice guide me and I regret it. I'll strive to make it right." Applause broke out, though unevenly, with some still hesitant. Michael nodded, satisfied. "Good. From now on, we'll hold monthly training. Elena, you'll lead with Chris." After the meeting, Jonathan and Michael discussed plans to improve the dealership. "We need a team that understands customers," Michael said. "Not just selling cars, but creating experiences." Jonathan suggested we could host a charity event inspired by the chosen to spread the message. Michael agreed, his eyes lighting up. "Great idea. Let's start next week." Elena approached, her expression softening. "Mr. Roumie, I want to thank you. Yesterday I thought you came to criticize, but your words made me rethink." Jonathan smiled gently. "Thank you, Elena. We all have pasts. What matters is learning from them." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'll try." "And can I watch The Chosen?" Jonathan grinned brightly. "Of course. You'll see Jesus isn't just a judge, but someone who understands." Elena smiled genuinely for the first time, and they shook hands, marking the start of reconciliation. Elena smiled genuinely for the first time, and they shook hands, marking the start of reconciliation. The atmosphere in Luxury Motors seemed to brighten, as if a fresh breeze had swept through after days of tension. Jonathan stood beside Michael Tran, his heart brimming with hope, while the late afternoon sun streamed through the large glass windows, illuminating the sleek cars prepared for the upcoming special day. A week had passed since the fateful meeting, and today Jonathan returned to finalize the car choice for his mother, eager to witness the changes he and Michael had planted. Stepping into the showroom, he immediately sensed the difference. Staff greeted him with radiant smiles, some waving enthusiastically, including Chris, the young employee who'd quietly supported him. Elena approached, her golden hair neatly tied back, her black suit crisp, but her smile now free of strain. "Hello, Mr. Roumie," she said warmly. "We've prepared a few options for your mother. I hope she'll like them." Jonathan nodded, touched. "Thank you, Elena. I'm sure she will." Michael appeared keys in hand, guiding Jonathan to the pearl-white sedan he'd selected. "This is the best in the lot," Michael said, opening the door to reveal plush leather seats and a modern dashboard. "We've checked it thoroughly to ensure safety for your mom." Jonathan slid into the driver's seat, his hand gliding over the steering wheel, envisioning his mother's joyful smile. "Perfect," he said, his eyes alight. "I'll take this one." While completing the paperwork, Elena stood by, assisting Chris with the documents. She glanced at Jonathan, then whispered to Chris, "I never thought I'd change this much. Yesterday I told my sister about it, and she urged me to watch The Chosen. I started the first episode, and Jesus feels so different from what I once knew." Chris smiled, nodding. "You'll find more to love. Mr. Roumie lives that truth." That afternoon, the dealership hosted a grand reopening to unveil its new ethos, marking the dawn of a respectful culture. Michael stood at the podium, microphone in hand, introducing Jonathan as the guest of honor. "Today, we're not just reopening the dealership. We're ushering in a new spirit," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd of staff and guests. Jonathan helped us recognize everyone's worth. Applause erupted, and Jonathan stepped forward, his voice resonant. "Thank you all," he began, his hand resting lightly on his chest where the cross lay hidden beneath his shirt. "I came here for my mother, but I learned that every encounter has meaning. My faith isn't to divide, it's to connect. I hope this dealership becomes a place where everyone feels welcome." His words stirred the air with emotion, and Elena, standing in the audience, dabbed at her eyes. After the event, Jonathan drove the white sedan to his mother's house, where she waited with a beaming smile. As she stepped out and saw the new car, tears welled up. "My son, did you do this for me?" she asked, her voice choked. Jonathan hugged her, grinning. "You deserve it, Mom. This is my love for you." She climbed in, admiring every detail, and Jonathan knew the gift had succeeded. The next morning, checking his phone, a message from an unknown number popped up. Opening it, he read, "Mr. Roumie, it's Elena. I watched the first episode of The Chosen with my sister last night. Seeing Jesus walk with people, not judge them, has given me much to reflect on. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll keep watching." Jonathan smiled, typing back, "Thank you, Elena. You'll find more beauty ahead. Wishing you a meaningful journey." A month later in Los Angeles, Jonathan participated in a The Chosen discussion panel. When an audience member asked how his faith influenced his daily life, he recounted the luxury motors incident, keeping names anonymous. "I was once asked to hide a symbol of my faith," he said, his hand brushing his chest. "The easiest path was to comply and avoid conflict, but sometimes faith calls us to stand firm with gentleness and respect." He continued, "That encounter led to a dialogue, and the person who opposed me later messaged that they began seeing Jesus in a new light, not as a judge, but as someone who understands. For me, living faith isn't about grand gestures before crowds. It's about authentic moments, standing by what I believe, and responding with love to those who see the world differently." Applause rang out, audience members nodding, feeling the story's power. The hall grew quiet, but not oppressively, so it was a stillness rich with meaning. Jonathan gazed at the crowd, knowing the tale from Luxury Motors had spread a reminder that faith lived with love could transform even the hardest hearts.